I was 28 years old, and I was certain my career was over. I had lost my wife. I had lost my father. I had lost my ability to think. Then I saw something in a cafeteria that won me the Nobel Prize. It was 1946, Cornell University. I was sitting in the cafeteria staring at nothing when some student started fooling around. He threw a plate in the air. The plate went up. It spun, and as it spun, it wobbled. I noticed something strange. The plate had a red medallion, the Cornell emblem, on its surface. I could see that the medallion was going around at a different rate than the wobble. The spin and the wobble were not the same speed. Most people would have looked away and gone back to their lunch. But I had nothing else. My mind was empty. So I started to figure out the motion of that rotating plate. And that wobbling plate would change everything. Let me go back a year. In 1945, I was at Los Alamos working on the atomic bomb. I was 27 years old, and I had already impressed Oppenheimer and Hans Bethe. I was the young genius, the rising star, but I had a secret. My wife was dying. Arlene. We had been sweethearts since high school. She had tuberculosis. I married her anyway because I loved her, and because time together, even limited time, was better than no time at all. She died on June 16, 1945. She was 25 years old. 1 month later, I watched the Trinity test through a truck windshield while everyone else wore dark goggles. The bomb worked. The war would end, and I felt nothing. I kept moving. If I stopped, I would fall apart. After the war, Cornell offered me a professorship. I took it. Then my father died in October 1946 of a stroke. There was no warning. My father was the one who taught me to be curious. When I was a boy, he would take me for walks. We would see a bird, and he would say, "That's a brown-throated thrush." In Portuguese, they call it bom de peida. In Chinese, it's chung ling. Then he would pause. "You can know the name of that bird in every language in the world. And when you're finished, you'll know absolutely nothing about the bird. You'll only know what humans call it. Now, let's look at what the bird is doing." That was my first lesson in physics. The difference between knowing the name of something and understanding it. Now, he was gone. At Cornell, I was supposed to be producing brilliant research, but I couldn't focus. Every equation made me sick. I started to think maybe I had peaked. Maybe the bomb was it. Maybe I had used up everything I had. Physics disgusted me. Then one night I asked myself a simple question. Why did I ever love physics in the first place? And I remembered. When I was in high school, I would see water running out of a faucet, growing narrower as it fell, and I would figure out what determines that curve. Not because it mattered, just because it was fun. I had forgotten how to play. So I made a decision. I said to myself, I'm burned out. I'll never accomplish anything important again. Fine. I've got a nice teaching job. And just like I read the Arabian Nights for pleasure, I'm going to play with physics whenever I want, without worrying about importance. No pressure, no expectations. Just play. 1 week later, I was in that cafeteria, and I saw the plate. Now back to the wobbling plate. I worked out the equations, and I discovered something beautiful. There was a precise mathematical ratio between the spin and the wobble. But the equation didn't satisfy me. I wanted to understand it deeper. Why that ratio? What were the forces doing? How did the accelerations balance? I spent days on it. I figured out the motion of every single particle in that plate. I understood exactly why it wobbled the way it did. And for the first time in over a year, I felt joy. I was so excited that I ran to find Hans Bethe. Bethe was a Nobel laureate. He had been my boss at Los Alamos, one of the greatest physicists alive. I said to him, "Hey Hans, I figured out something interesting about wobbling plates. Here is why the ratio works out the way it does. He looked at my equations and said, "Feynman, that is pretty interesting, but what is the importance of it? Why are you doing it?" I laughed and said, "There is no importance whatsoever. I am just doing it for the fun of it." Beth did not understand, but I did not care. I had made a promise to myself. I was done chasing importance. I was going to follow my curiosity wherever it led. If you are finding this valuable, subscribe. I tell the real stories of how breakthroughs actually happen. So I kept going. The wobbling plate got me thinking. If I could understand rotation that deeply, what else could I understand? I started thinking about how electron orbits behave in relativity. The electron spins and it wobbles, just like the plate. But the electron also has quantum properties. It does not behave like a normal object. That led me to the Dirac equation. Dirac had described how electrons behave at high speeds, close to the speed of light. His equations were complicated, hard to visualize, and hard to calculate with. I started playing with them. What if I could find a simpler way to see what was happening? Then I thought about light, photons. When an electron moves, it can emit or absorb a photon. That is how light and matter interact. That is the heart of quantum electrodynamics. But quantum electrodynamics had a problem. When physicists tried to calculate what should happen, they got infinities, nonsense answers. The math said an electron should have infinite energy, which is obviously wrong. Everyone was stuck on this problem. The greatest minds in physics had been struggling with it for years. I started drawing pictures. What if instead of writing long equations, I drew little diagrams? A line for an electron, a wavy line for a photon, a point where they meet. I could draw every possible way an electron and photon could interact, and each diagram corresponded to a term in the equation. The diagrams made everything clearer. I could see the physics. I could calculate faster. And I could find a way around the infinities. I was not trying to solve the biggest problem in physics. I was just playing, following one idea to the next. From a wobbling plate to electron spins to photons to diagrams. It was effortless. It was like uncorking a bottle. Everything flowed out. These diagrams became known as Feynman diagrams. They revolutionized how physicists calculate. Today, every particle physicist in the world uses them. And it all started with a plate in a cafeteria. In 1965, I flew to Stockholm to receive the Nobel Prize in Physics. I shared it with Julian Schwinger and Shinichiro Tomonaga. We had all solved the infinity problem in quantum electrodynamics, each in our own way. Their methods were elegant, mathematical, formal. Mine was pictures. The prize committee cited our fundamental work in quantum electrodynamics, with deep plowing consequences for the physics of elementary particles. Deep plowing consequences. From a plate wobbling in a college cafeteria. When I gave my Nobel lecture, I told them the real story. I did not talk about how hard I worked. I did not talk about my brilliant insights. I told them about being burned out, about deciding to play, about the spinning plate. I said that the Feynman diagrams, the path integrals, the whole business that won me this prize came from piddling around with the wobbling plate. The audience laughed. They thought I was being modest, but I was completely serious. Here is what I learned from the worst year of my life. When I tried to do important work, I was paralyzed. The pressure crushed me. I was so worried about mattering that I forgot how to think. But when I gave myself permission to play, everything changed. The joy came back, and with the joy came the ideas. The plate did not matter. The wobble did not matter. What mattered was that I stopped trying to be important and started being curious again. I spent the rest of my career teaching students this lesson. I would tell them, you have to fall in love with some activity. You have to be doing things for the fun of it, and if it is something you like, then you will develop intuition, because your unconscious is working on it even when you are not. The students who struggled were always the ones who asked, what is this good for? Will this be on the exam? Is this important? The students who thrived were the ones who asked, "What happens if I try this? Why does this work? What is really going on here?" That is the difference between knowing the name of something and understanding it. My father taught me that when I was 5 years old, watching birds in the woods, and I had to lose everything to remember it. I went on to do many things. I worked on superfluidity, the strange behavior of liquid helium at very low temperatures. I developed the Parton model that helped us understand protons and neutrons. I gave lectures that became some of the most popular physics textbooks ever written. And in 1986, I served on the commission investigating the Challenger disaster. When I dropped an O-ring into ice water on live television and showed the whole world why the shuttle exploded, I was doing the same thing I always did. Playing, asking questions, figuring things out with my own hands. But when people ask me what I am most proud of, I do not talk about the Nobel Prize or the Challenger investigation. I tell them about the day I saw a spinning plate in a cafeteria and decided to figure out why it wobbled, because that was the day I remembered what physics was for. Not for prizes, not for prestige, not for importance, for the joy of finding things out. I was Richard Feynman. I won the Nobel Prize because I learned to play again, and it started with the worst year of my life. If these stories resonate with you, subscribe and join me for the next one.